Today I'm going to talk about the blanks required to make a pen. Now I use all different kinds of woods. I use traditional wood, but I also make my own out of resin and antler and all different kinds of exotic woods. Some are soft, some are hard, which makes it quite challenging to make these, but nevertheless I want to make things that are unusual and different and unique. Over the years I've probably made 20 or 30 different style of pen. They come in kits. You can get them at a number of different places online. The area that's milled on the pen is called a blank, and I use a number of different materials and ways to make them. I use this, I'm going to say I think it's HDP material. It's like cutting board material. So I screw all of these in accordingly. You'll see there's letters. So there's C, there's A, here's B, and here's D, and I got arrows, and they all go in respectively, and then I screw them from the bottom up to the top, and then I caulk the whole inside. For example, once this is on here, screwed in place, I'll caulk in here, right in this crack, to make sure that no resin leaks out. That's a colossal mess. But I'll insert pine cones in there, and I just picked up a bunch of these magnolia pods, so it might be a little high because it would actually be about that high. Actually, that would work. I just have to get the resin above that, and then I put it in a pressure pot, which I also own, and I hooked all of this extra stuff up to it and a nice new release valve, and this is what I use to push the air out of the blanks or molds. I make my blanks in advance, and here's half of what came out of that blank, that mold maker that I had. But here are the other ones. There are several. These are made, obviously they come sliced. You cut these in half and fourths, whatever. But this is a piece of wood that I've dyed. But I like to make unusual things. These round ones, I actually use a 3/4 inch PVC tube, and I block the one end up with a cork, and then I pour it, and it obviously stays nice. But if you want to keep reusing the cork, you have to put like a rubber gasket or rubber, like the fingertip of a plastic glove, one of those gloves you wear to keep your hands clean. Any malleable plastic glove will work. Just use the fingertips, cut them off the glove. Then you can reuse. Once you pull the cork out, you can reuse the cork. Otherwise, the cork would be toast. But I've used parts of these already, and I'll cut a PVC tube, I don't know, 8 inches long, so I can get a couple of blanks out of it. And I can show you this process at a later date. Let me know if you're interested in seeing that. I can do that on a separate video. This one has a closed up pine cone in it, and it's got clear resin in it and a rustic resin in it and a silver resin in it. So, and I put them together and I kind of just stir them all around in there, and that's why I end up with a mixture of colors. You can also like pour one side and then pour another side with a different color. There's so many varieties and ways to make things. Now this was a Perlex resin mixture, and what's inside is what I call the leaves that come off of a pine cone. I don't know if they're really called leaves, but they're the little petals. They have a really sharp end on them, but I think that looks pretty cool from a sideways view. This may require a lot more work though, because it doesn't look like the resin was infused in there even after I put it in the pressure pot. So this may take more work to get nice, which is the way it is. And it might work good if I slice it this way and use it for knife sheaths, scales they're called. This is a clear resin embedding a little tiny corn cob, and I've never milled these, so I don't know if they would work. My concern would be that this would be too open and I'd have holes in it, and that does happen. This one I've taken a resin, and I just had this little stubby piece of a resin pour in a tube, and then I added spalted maple on both ends, and this is spalted maple end grain, so this would be more challenging to mill. So a piece like this and like this, although this is long grain and this is long grain, this would be easier to mill than this. End grain's challenging, and then you're changing the quality of what you're milling. So these are cool, they look great, but they're definitely difficult. This is also long grain, end grain. They're more difficult to mill. And then I've done stuff like this, where these are all pine cone centers like I showed you earlier. They're just so cool. They're really beautiful. Just alone they're beautiful. And they're embedded. Now that one's a little crooked, but that would straighten right out once you milled it on the machine. But they're dry to start with, and then you mill them in shape. So there's another one, and that's kind of a clear to pinky look. Here's another one. So they're all different. This one, these are walnut shells, and this is in a purple and blue resin, and that's pretty cool. So when you're doing this, if you're not using, pens come in different sizes. Some have 2 tubes, some have 1 tube. So if you have one that's 1 tube, this whole thing would be your blank. So if you have a pen that requires 2 blanks, 2 brass tubes, what you want to do is find 2 pieces that kind of work together. In this case, this one has got walnut in it, so the other part I would use maybe a solid piece of walnut. For that corn one, it's blonde, it's light, I might use a piece of oak. Now this is just a piece of oak. This is just a solid piece of oak. It's blonde, and so is this. I could stain these, and they're pretty small in circumference. That's another issue. If you're starting off with a big tube, circumference big, this probably is going to be a little bit more challenging to make. But if it's a smaller tube, like a 7mm tube, it'll fit nicely in something like this. So it's not that long. So what would you mix with this? You maybe mix something like this with it if you have a 2-tube pen. So there's a lot of things to consider when you're doing that. Here's another mixture. This is again end grain. This is walnut, so this is long grain, but it's walnut. So now you have walnut, resin, end grain, spalted maple, which is probably look beautiful, but it'll be challenging to make. Here's long grain, resin, and long grain. So this not so hard. I'm talking milling with your lathing tools. And I'll tell you, these can be fragile. This one was, really nice, but it broke. It broke in an area where it was a little on the fragile side. Can I fix this? Probably not. But if I have 2 pen blanks, and I might be able to put one here and one here, I've got my 2 pen blanks. That also may be an issue. There's issues with these things. Here's something else that could be an issue when you're milling. So I wouldn't use something like that. Or I'd throw it into another bin where I put a lot of my little scraps that I can't use. So I make pots. And in this case I used, I think this is 4 inches around here. Maybe it's the inside. It's 4.5 inches, so I guess this would be considered a 5-inch PVC or sewer pipe or something like that. I have attached a piece of, this is cypress, no, I'm sorry, this is cedar, red cedar on the bottom. It still has bark on it. which I don't know if I'll use that. I don't think I will. I think it'll all be milled down. But inside is just it's actually cardboard, but it's enough to hold. I set this and cure this so it doesn't fall apart. I want to be able to mill that away. But I will fill this up with resin. So all of these little pieces, for the most part, well, you see, here's a piece of, this is a piece of antler, this is a piece of resin. Some of these are wood with resin on them. I've already poured them. There's another piece of antler down there. So I'll just take these scraps that I have and put them in place and then mill it and put it in the pressure pot and make a bowl out of it, or a vessel of some kind. It could be a two-part vessel. This could be the base, and then I could do a totally different top. And here's another one that I've got. This is that's probably 3.5 inch deep piece of, I think it's cherry. I make so many different kinds of things that I have all different kinds of scraps. That's probably just going to float away. And the thing about doing this is these things will want to float when you put the resin in them, so you have to have some kind of a system to hold these down. Some people just use tape across there to hold them in place. I'm trying out this rubber. I guess it's some kind of a gasket that would go between some kind of tubing for drains or something. I don't know. Somebody gave it to me. I'm willing to try just about whatever to make things fun and exciting. So this is another pour that's about to be done. Corn. I gotta try these at one point. I haven't done that yet. I don't know if people make things that are really big, so the whole corn is just embedded in there and they don't get into the corn itself. So basically you're seeing that. I don't know if you can see that well enough. You're basically seeing the corn. I don't know. I'm trying. I experiment all the time. Again, a closed up pine cone. You can see the pine cone there pretty clearly. And this one I milled because I was going to use this for a pen. And you can see vaguely there, it's got antler in it right there, and there is antler. That looks like antler. This was sliced clear. That's antler, antler. So there's a lot of antler in this. Sometimes when you make these pours, they, even though you're using the pressure pot, etc., they can be on the fragile side. And I drilled this, and I drilled from this side down, but when it got to the bottom, the pressure and the heat just made this part expand. So I don't even know if I can use this. So I picked a different blank to use for that pen. This one's kind of nice, got some interesting colors, and it also has this maple burl. Now the resin is nice and hard, but the burl itself, it's kind of punky. I can actually stick my fingernail in there, so this is going to be a real challenge to work with, but I love a challenge. But it's also very small in circumference. It's actually a square, but the size tube I put in here is going to have to be small. Same thing with this one. I think this came from the same cut. Maybe like that. Looks like that's how it was cut. Because this is mirroring and this is mirroring. So those would be challenging simply because of that. Now I could put a bunch of CA glue or sanding sealer on this to let it soak in, and hopefully that would be enough to harden it. Maybe enough to harden it just till I got past that. It would take a lot to harden that. That's why they're still in the bin. And here's another one of those pieces. Now this is big enough surely for a hole to be drilled in and used for a pen. And then just something simple. These are easy. They're pure resin, nothing extra. It's short though, so you have to think about what you're going to use for something like this. Typically a blank this short is going to be requiring a 2 brass pen. So what would go with this to make it nice? Maybe because it's on the blonde side, I use this. So I've got oak and I've also got resin. I don't know. And then finally I've got this last one that I dyed. And this is, it's end grain. It's end grain this way. It's end grain. So this will be a challenge, but I wanted to try and dye it. So I've used a couple of different dyes. Now, do I know how deep that dye went into this wood? I don't. That's crapshoot. And then here's, this one's already been drilled, the hole, and that's a pretty big hole. And it's short, so a specific kind of pen will be used for that. And I already showed you this. This hasn't been cut yet. I don't know what I'll do with this. I might make like a nice knife sheath, a big one. Okay. In part 2 of this pen making video, I'm going to discuss drilling blanks, cutting blanks, drilling blanks, the preparation it takes before you even get to the lathe, which can be kind of tedious, but I'm going to get into that in part 2. Stay tuned for that. Subscribe, hit the bell button for notifications, and when I publish it, you'll see it. Thanks for watching.